I am very pleased to speak today with Joanna Leśnierowska, who is an independent choreography curator, visual dramaturge, and light and space composer. She was one of the first dance critics in Poland and has written and lectured extensively on Polish choreography, and she has done so internationally. From 2004 to 2020, Joanna founded and directed the performance program of the ArtStation Foundation in Poznań, which was the first regular dance space and choreographic development center in Poland. During her tenure, she initiated and led several international collaboration projects. Joanna authored books such as the anthology Choreography Strategies, which she co-edited with Marta Kyle, and it was published in 2021. In this book, she surveys the present and anticipates the future of choreographic and performance. Joanna is also an independent curator who is involved in projects at the National Museum and Nowy Teatr in Warsaw. But her latest project has been Aktion Susz, a program of choreographic reflection and research at Museum Susz in Engadin, Switzerland, which she ran from 2019 to 2023. And most recently, Joanna has started her collaboration with our project Performance, Conservation, Materiality, Knowledge, and we are immensely happy to have you on board, Joanna. Joanna, so welcome to our two questions, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Hello, I'm super pleased and excited and look forward.
Excellent. So here are my two questions. Can performance be conserved? If so, how? And if not, why not? What does it mean to conserve performance?
Can performance be conserved? Let me please start from confession that I have a little bit problem with the word conservation, but even more with the word preservation. It always brings to me an associations with some biological laboratory medical studies in which in the big jars we are actually witnessing conserved fetuses and pieces of the body, and it's always been to me a very scary image, and also it has been always a confirmation of something that once used to be alive and now it's dead and preserved for eternity in this very weird form and colors. So whenever I hear about performance conservation or preservation, I'm immediately shiver, let's say, and say, no, I mean, let's try to find a different word for something so important, like what I understand, prolonging life of a performance. How, for me, the most important question is how to keep performance alive, and whether with the tools of conservation or of thinking about preservation, conservation, we are able to make such an ephemeral art that performance choreography is, living longer. And then, of course, what does it mean? It's another very big question. So actually, the closest term that is dearest to my heart is rather cultivation. Also because to cultivate means to care for something, like cultivate a garden, cultivate very precious to us plants in our home, making sure that something stayed alive and fresh. So I would maybe vote for replacing conservation and preservation with a word cultivation, and that it actually brings us immediately to a notion of conservation, to the conservation as a notion of care. And it's for me very important because actually all my professional life, and especially the first 17 years in which I have been dedicating to running a choreography development center in Poland, bringing into the world the whole generation of dance makers and making sure that the discourse around choreography, but also the artwork itself, that they are actually staying alive and growing and multiply themselves by the potentials also of a talent of artists. This is actually what is in a certain way a sort of a permaculture that I have been always engaged with. And that actually makes me really excited then to discuss what are actually the strategies to make this ephemeral artwork very poetic also, but also so concrete still, because so much based on the body art form, alive and alive longer than expected, or than maybe many of us, especially non-connected professionally to this art field, would imagine impossible. So the answer to your question is, I do believe that performance can be cultivated, and not even just the performance artworks like that, but just the life of performances can and should be taken care of, as well as the people who are making them. Because as long as we're gonna take care also of artists and people connected to making performances, then we can be sure that the art form will stay alive and will be growing, and will definitely be with us much longer than we expect. And also running for 17 years a choreographic development center, many times I've been questioning how to keep in the memory of audiences, but also in the history, especially those work of choreography that I found extremely important, not only in terms of a let's say literary artistic success, whatever that means. I mean, let's don't go there. What does it mean, success in art? But still, we can agree that there, in the 17 years of curriculum of a choreographic center, there has been works that became seminal for the development of choreography in the country. And it's always extremely painful to witness them being performed 5 times, or if they're lucky and they get international presentations, maybe 20 times, but no longer usually in the field of choreography or contemporary choreography. And also knowing how limited access audience has to these works, there's always a question: what would be the ways to make sure that those very important seminal works can reach much wider audiences and can stay in our consciousness much longer than this 1 season or 2 choreographic seasons? So for me, that's also always a question that comes together with questioning, can performance be conserved, is also connected also to the relevance of conserving, preserving, cultivating performance, in order to make sure that in the history are staying important and relevant works, and that actually for a communities of such an underdeveloped dense histories and infrastructure like Polish and like many Eastern European, and not only Eastern European countries, becomes really almost a to be or not to be question. In the tradition of a country so obsessed with a theater like Poland, for example, a cultivation and preservation of choreographic work is actually a very important political task of creating a history and an archive that is actually going to stimulate imagination of generations of artists, but also audiences, something they can recall to build their own identity as an art form, as an artist, to create a lineage of works that they can relate to, that they can actually dialogue with, that will actually become a kind of a pool of our community and communal memory that we can always reflect on and depend on and call back in the moments of our struggles to maintain the art form going. And I found it extremely relevant, and that actually is an importance also, in my opinion, one of the most important tasks also of performance cultivation and preservation is also to create this archives and history of an art form that is not so present and not so known in the home country as well. Of course, the question of how to cultivate a performance, how to preserve it, how to conserve it is actually a question we could discuss for hours. days and months, and actually you do it already for almost 4 years, and it's still probably not even close to the end. And this is also why it makes it so exciting, because naturally, of course, we could imagine that the most natural ways of preserving performance, the first that comes to mind, maybe are documenting it and archiving in the digital way. So to capture the material, the choreography in video, to record the works, to create a photographic documentation, to collect also all the background of the creation, so documents from the process, and all the reminiscence and remnants also of the practices that led to creation of this performance. I must, however, confess that that kind of archiving is also bringing to me a notion of this medical way of preserving. So let's be honest that whenever we record something or even collect all these documents, we still have a very limited access to the essence of what the performance has been. And I always question whether these very known and traditional ways are really the most appropriate to preserve, to maintain memory, life, and understanding also of what the seminal performance we want to preserve has in fact been. Because I do believe that choreography is actually an art form, performance as well, but especially choreography nowadays is a place of an encounter of an emancipated spectator with an artist that has something to share. But actually the outcome and the performance itself is just a dialogue. It's an exchange of ideas that are asking also from the audience a response. Audiences are bringing to performances their own background, sensitivities, understandings, and that way the dialogue between stage and audience is growing and bringing performance into a totally different dimension. So actually the question is what we really should preserve, what we are actually focusing on when talking about the conservation, cultivation of performance and bringing it forward. Is it really the materiality of it, the concrete steps of choreography and concrete notes of a choreographer that led to creation? Or whether should we also incorporate in the thinking about preservation audience side, how they have received the performance, what were the circumstances also in their lives, both private, but first of all, social, political, the critical moments of the history that made this performance and encounter with it meaningful and relevant to the degree that we believe we could reproduce these conditions to make sure that the impact of the performance will be similarly relevant for the next generation of audiences that will encounter it. So in fact, where we land immediately is more in a discussion whether does it make sense to reconstruct performances exactly in the way they has been created, or rather should we focus on reactivation them, questioning what has been actually relevant for the reception of the performance, so we can restage and reproduce similar effects, but not being quite aware that the audience that will encounter the work is coming from completely different backgrounds, socially, politically, just historically also. Just to call the latest example, I am 100% sure that audiences before pandemic and audiences after pandemic are gonna read performances in a totally different ways, filtered by their personal global shared experience of pandemic. And as long as we are going to be aware of it, that the work of the conservation will become much, much broader practice than just archiving and documenting the real artifact, so much connected to a very moment that the performance has been created and first time ever shared with the audiences.
Thank you, Anna. This has been a very rich and insightful answer. And I wonder on this note, and especially because you and I are on two different continents right now, you in Berlin and I myself in Brasilia, in Brazil.
So you are in my beloved Brazil, yeah.
You have been working on amazing projects on the Polish choreographer and dancer Janka Rudzka. She was born Polish, but she was very active in Brazil. And you followed her career and her artistic projects here, and basically created a wonderful project and a sort of activation, reconstruction of her work using experimental methods. And I wonder whether you could talk a little bit more about
exactly.
this.
It's one of those parts of my professional life that is connected also a lot to a certain magic and zeitgeist, and this incredible present that I have been offered by the universe to just visit a festival of dance in Salvador, in Bahia, in Brazil, and completely unexpectedly discover a Polish choreographer that actually has run away from Poland right after the Second World War and has become one of the most important contemporary or modern dance figures in the Bahia region, very relevant for the contemporary dance of Brazil in general. Nobody ever heard of Janka Rudzka in contemporary Poland. I couldn't believe it's possible, but of course it triggered immediately my interest, and I started to trace and investigate and look for information about this artist, and I knew that I'm going to dedicate to her a big part of my professional life since then, and this is exactly what has happened. And one of the most difficult elements of this task of tracing Janka Rudzka work was actually discovering that there is very little leftovers of her artistic work in Bahia itself. She was there in the end of the 50s, and it was a time when nobody really recorded performances on the video, when contemporary dance was not really present also in the press. So actually the memory of her work still lives with some artists and people now over 70 and 80 who still remember her and or worked with her or seen her performances live. And also through the pictures of a photographer who fell in love with a principal dancer, a soloist of Janka Rudzka, and through this love followed the company and left behind quite some photographies from performances. This is how life interferes with history, with big history, and thanks to this love, we also have a little insight into the works she has created. What was especially important and relevant about her work was not only that she brought to Brazil a belief that education of choreographer should be really much broader than an education of a dancer, and she brought knowledge coined in Bauhaus in Europe. She wanted that artists of dance are really studying theater, literature, poetry, visual arts, and she was actually the first director and created a higher education in choreography dance in the University of Bahia, Federal University of Bahia. But first of all, she has been fascinated with the Afro-Brazilian traditional culture, which is actually very much connected to the candomblé cult. And candomblé is a religion brought by enslaved people from Africa to Brazil, and is a very sexy and dancey religion. There is a saying that every god in candomblé has its own samba. So Janka was extremely fascinated by this candomblé rituals and traditions, and she actually believed that without the recognition and investigation of a quite complicated, difficult history of Brazil and reaching out into these traditional sources, contemporary art will never truly develop. So when I actually decided to focus big part of my professional life for the next years around the research on Janka Rudzka, it was for me also a question whether at all I am able to reconstruct her work from these little fossils of her practice and performances that I was able to find. And also I very quickly understood that I'm not so much interested in it, because what I'm interested in is more reconstruction and following her gestures of deep interest in the traditional culture. And that way, I actually has created works which were bringing contemporary artists back to their traditional cultures. In fact, I focused more on the reconstruction and preservation of a gesture of her interest in the traditional culture and choreography than a literal steps. And that way, we have invited audiences also more on a journey to our roots and back. And I brought together traditions both of Brazil and Afro-Brazilian culture and Polish traditional culture, rather than exposing to contemporary audiences something that I would claim is anyhow close to what Janka Rudzka did on stage in the 1950s. But I was very much aware that it would be rather a confabulation and a misappropriation of these little elements that I have actually encountered. And I was not at the time interested in a speculation on how her works would work. Although I do believe that speculation, alternative versions of history are also one of the very exciting ways of performance preservation and of stimulating an imagination of a generation of audiences and artists. But that's again a later recognition of the topic. It didn't accompany me on the first iterations of the project around Janka Rudzka. So this actually taps to a very interesting area of performance conservation preservation, which is mostly focused on the notion of a body-to-body knowledge transmission and how we can actually bring the knowledge of bodies through generations onwards by sharing gestures, traditions, rituals, and very particular practices coined by the artists that has been working before us and are now able to be passed on the new generation of artists. And I know that the project that I'm so happy to be involved in now is also very busy with that expanded understanding of preservation. So I am extremely excited to maybe add also a little bit to this reflection, not only from my own professional experience, but also knowing about so many dance artists that are dedicating their life to creating historical practices, a living legacy, bringing them into the now, and stimulating creativity of many young artists with information and gestures and practices of their predecessors and dance ancestors, dance mother, fathers, grandparents. That way also creating a very intense, long and rich lineage of development, and letting us believe that we are not alone in the world, that there is history, there is past, and if there is past and now, there's definitely gonna be the future for an art form itself.
But I would like to stay on this level of experiments and experimental cultivation, if not preservation of performance. And you said something very interesting, that speculation might actually also contribute to forms of living on through change, perhaps, of performance.
We all know that in contemporary world, there are still many places in the world where choreography, dance, and performance are struggling with a lack of infrastructure, proper funding and promotions, but also with a lack of knowledge about the history. In that moment, what can we preserve when we don't really know what has happened before us, or how to reach out to the history of choreography or performance of our countries? And here, I think speculation becomes a very important and inspiring also tool, because it allows us to engage in a creative invention of certain alternative versions of history based sometimes on fossils of information, and sometimes even taking out more from a desires and dreams, to whom we would like to belong, what we would love to be part of, that will actually make us find our own identity and also bring it further on into the future. In this regard, I would love to call maybe a very interesting project that I was witnessing already in Polish context, and it has actually happened in 2008 during a Polish-German exchange cultural year, which actually, among many different projects between Polish and Germany art communities, brought together also choreographers from Berlin and some places in Poland. The idea of a project was to bring them to the mountain place where, in the safety and silence of a beautiful mountain landscape, they could get to know each other and create something together. The meeting started on a very sad note because artists discovered that they have almost nothing in common in terms of artistic development and background. And what you do in the moment in which you realize that there is no common ground in which you can even kick off a collaboration like that. Saying openly, artists just decided to cook a nice dinner and get some nice drinks. And out of this long night of trouble, they come up with an idea. What if we would imagine in our history a figure of an artist that would bring both our communities and our histories together? And this is how this group of artists has created Weronika Blumstein, a fictional choreographer, a vehicle for history, a Jewish origin artist born in Krakow, but actually connected to the German Ausdruckstanz transition, bringing together Jews, Poles, and Germans in one person together. They have engaged in reconstructing the works of Weronika Blumstein, and that helped them to understand that history could have gone completely different than it in fact went, and allow them to creatively focus on finding more and more things that could connect the communities of German artists, Polish artists, and also with the Jewish background. That way also engaging in rewriting a history in a very positive way, and encouraging and empowering artists towards more bold investigations and collaborations. And in this let's say, how to say it, stimulation of imagination, that not only Weronika Blumstein has been born, but also the connection and a certain kind of a tradition of thinking also about choreographic history has been brought to life. And I think it's stimulating development of choreography, at least in Poland, for some time. I really do believe that this is also especially knowing how much modern dance has always been misappropriated also by different ideologies and political powers. It is really our role as artists to take care about claiming back our gestures, choreographies, and artists, and taking them out from the hardcore political propagandas, and bringing them back to where they belong, to the bodies of artists, the bodies of people, of nations, of societies. Ausdruckstanz has been misappropriated and used as a propagandic tool by the Nazi Germany. And we also know from the history of a communist movement after the war that the folk dances of every Eastern European country has been engaged in the political propaganda of the nationalistic and communistic governments. So preservation of certain traditional movements by the contemporary artists and scientists is an extremely important political gesture of claiming back traditions and bringing truth back to original sources of dance culture, and also their original functions, which is, first of all, building communities, learning how to create harmony together in the organized movement, how to understand them as a living legacy of a society that has nothing to do with the political agendas of tyrannies and ideologies that decide to use and also arrest our bodies and group bodies and individual bodies, taking them away from us. So in this regard, speculations and reactivations of traditional gestures and choreographies is also such a relevant actions for the communities which are struggling with certain white spots in their dance history, but also which has in their history moments where dances has been misappropriated, and in a way this revision of a history of dance is really extremely relevant for the futures also of the whole generation of artists and audiences as well, because we all have bodies and we all should get back in contact with our bodies. I strongly believe in it. Therefore, we would be such a different community, such a different society, if we would all get back into understanding that we are a sensing, feeling, and thinking bodies also. So I'm always very much interested in this dimension of performance preservation, conservation, and cultivation. That it's not only making sure that certain artists' names stay in a history and certain works are preserved as seminal for later, but that actually at stake are really futures of the whole communities, not only of artists, but also societies.
Very insightful. I mean, if conservation/cultivation is a form of political gesture, right? On the one hand, you said that certain political systems, and especially in the East, they perpetuated certain forms or misappropriated certain forms of dance and performance, folk dance most of all. On the other hand, non-conserving, non-cultivating, and somehow, yeah, the selection process was to preserve is actually highly political, because for many performances that are preserved, many are also left out, right?
Yeah, history is a big net. We are fishing, but many items are going through the holes. So it is, of course, as every choice, politics is immediately there. I mean, we are choosing something to be visible and create spaces of visibility, to leave something in the shadow. So I think that the responsibility of people, of us who are dealing with archiving, documenting, and history of arts is also really a responsibility on this political level and towards futures of ours.
But what I want us to follow up with is a very personal question. You are a choreographer yourself and a dancer and a dramaturge. How does cultivation feels as a lived experience? How do you feel you embody conservation/cultivation through your practice? Now less curatorial, but more yourself as a maker, as a dancer.
Well, it's a very interesting question, because actually the art practice of mine is very much connected to my interest in visual arts, and also I, as a visual dramaturg and light designer, I am very much concerned with creation and composition of images, and also I'm interested in ephemerality of images, which actually I am also investigating with dwelling in and examining zones of shadow and low levels of visibility, which doesn't go well neither by through photography nor video work. So through all my career, I am actually witnessing a certain impossibility to capture my performances. It's almost as if they lived only through the embodied experience on the moment when they are presented. So to me, I actually realized recently that I am interested much more in reactivation and building on every next performance with the next work coming, which actually I am also doing often. I have realized that my way of conserving and preserving is really focusing and developing certain creative strategies and layering actually performances, or insisting on staying longer than on a span of one creation with certain topics and strategies, so they can over the time develop into a certain let's say, palimpsest or self-palimpsest, and preserve all the layers as if the performance of 2020 would never be possible without all the creation that happened since 2004, 5, through all these years. And that actually makes me immediately into the talk we used to have once, when you shared with me some of the tools of traditional conservation. And I was extremely fascinated by this X-ray methodology, and that are actually showing the layers of paintings and help conservators to study how the work has been morphing or developing or being layered over the different moments of its being created and brought into our era. And in that way, also for me, it's a very exciting tool to think about my own work in the same way. So if I would make an X-ray of the performances that I have been doing just recently, they would definitely reveal all the necessary layers that had to happen from the very beginning of when I started to work on stage. And in that way, also for me, the most interesting is rather to looking also for some visual representations of my own performances that rather trigger imagination and emotions than just try to preserve something that is actually ungraspable with the naked eye, with the eye equipped in camera lenses or fixed by the video performance. I am actually very much interested in looking for those visual representation that are more triggering also audiences to stay active in response to the performance, rather than to be just offered an insight into what has been once alive and now it doesn't exist anymore. And in that regard, I am extremely fascinated with the possibility of preserving performances, and I hope that I will experiment on my own work through the art of comics. Because when we think about cartoon art, this is exactly how I understand choreography is being created and received by the audience. I mean, comics is actually capturing movement, but to activate the movement of an action in the book, we need a beholder, we need an eye of a reader that is actually making a connection between one frame and the next frame coming. And exactly in this white stripe between two cartoon images, the movement happens. So it's actually, there is a necessity of a reader to activate the book into the superhero action, for example, right? And the same happens with choreography. Without the audience, without the onlooker, my choreography is just a collection of images, but it becomes alive and it becomes filled with meaning when audience look at it with all their physicality, when the embodied perception is happening at the same time, when the images evolve, moving images are happening in front of our eyes. So that would be probably one of my future experimental tasks, how I could document my own performances through the art of comics. But also I'm super excited with the possibility of activation and reactivation of performances, and also passing on materials on the new generation of performance on the younger bodies, which actually I also will have soon an opportunity to translate and transmit one of my oldest performances to a new generation of artists and give them the choreography so they can take it further with them. I already know it's not going to be the same performance. It's going to be just another iteration that is going to bring forward strategies and compositional and movement strategies and images of the first work into the future, like enriched with the responses of performers themselves, but also with the audiences that are gonna experience this new version of the so-called old work. And I can't wait to see what new meanings will come up and how much it's gonna resonate with current times as well.
Wonderful, Joanna. I'm also very much looking forward to see how many of those fascinating ideas you brought up during this conversation materialize during our research festival that we collaboratively plan and already are preparing for September 2024.
Yeah.
But for now, Joanna, thank you so much. It has been a great pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you for invitation to share my thoughts, but also thank you especially for invitation to join your amazing project. So I hope that some of these ideas can land in the community and can provide an afterlife of your 4 years research and will come in a different forms through the work of artists that will get to know about them.